Hey, great thinkers. Welcome back to another awesome episode of the Think Great Experience. I am very excited today because we have somebody on this show who inspires me deeply. We are joined here with Aaron Horn. He is the executive director at the new Bohemian Innovation. He is also on the board for Miracle Travel Works, and he is the president of beatcancertoday.org. I don't know how he finds the time for all this, but he did find the time to be on our show. Aaron, hey, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks, Eric. It's good to see you again.
I know it's been a long time since I was down at your event for Beat
Yeah.
Cancer Today. We were just talking about that maybe, 5-6 years ago or more.
Yeah, more, probably closer to 8 or 9.
Oh, geez. Yeah. And you were saying that might have been the second event you had.
Yeah. And we ran those every year all the way up until last year, obviously, like many. But yeah, those events just got bigger and bigger every year. So pretty cool that you were there towards the beginning.
Well, and we're due for coming back out for the next one. I would love to come out for that. It was an amazing event. Can you tell us a little bit about your role as the executive director for NewBoCo?
NewBoCo, yeah.
NewBoCo.
So, yeah, so it's a nonprofit in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. We actually started as the Iowa Startup Accelerator back in 2014 was our first cohort. And at that time, I had just moved out here to Eastern Iowa. So by way of background and how we met, I've always been the head of IT at different companies in different industries. So when I met you, I was the head of IT for a global ag company called Becker Underwood, headquartered out of Ames, Iowa. Did that for at least 12 years, and then we sold to BASF, which is the big German chemical company. Took that opportunity to move over to Eastern Iowa, and I was a CIO for a healthcare startup there for a while. Excuse me. And then after a year or two there, I was the head of IT for the railroad. So, industry hopping from ag manufacturing to healthcare software to the railroad. And did that for 2.5 years. But when I very first moved out here to Eastern Iowa, I got hooked up with a guy named Erik Engelman, and he was starting an accelerator, the state's first one in Iowa, actually. And so I became an investor in that and joined the board for the Iowa Startup Accelerator. And it was a nonprofit, pretty much did that program, but very soon added a lot of other programs that were just filling gaps that we saw in the entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Iowa. And so pretty soon it didn't make sense to be called the Iowa Startup Accelerator anymore when we ran so many other programs. So we changed our name to the new Bohemian Innovation Collaborative, or NewBoCo for short. We are in the New Bohemia district of Cedar Rapids, which is just south of downtown. And essentially we run programs. We still run an accelerator. In fact, we added a new one last year called the EdTech Accelerator. And so we run accelerators, we run other entrepreneurial support programs, but essentially all the programs that we run kind of fall within 3 main areas: entrepreneurship, tech education, and corporate innovation. And so we've got those entrepreneurial support programs. For tech education, we kind of have what I call the long game and the short game. So the long game is K through 12. We're really passionate about getting computer science into every school across Iowa. And so we teach teachers how to teach computer science using the free code.org curriculum. And then the short game is aimed at adult career changers. So obviously, as I was the head of IT at these different companies trying to hire technical talent, it was difficult, and it is still difficult. And so we basically back in 2017 came up with this code school boot camp, essentially to teach adult career changers how to be software developers in just 20 weeks. Wow. So we launched that back in 2017. And since then we've added 3 more different curriculum that's IT related, just to try and help companies in Iowa have a bigger talent pool to select from when they're trying to hire tech talent. And then corporate innovation stuff is just, like agile consulting and teaching companies how to be more innovative and entrepreneurship kind of program.
I like that. Yeah. Well, and with the constant shifts in technology, I mean, you guys have your work cut out for you. It's never becomes complacent in your industry.
Yeah, for sure. And with the whole pandemic taking everything online, essentially, that's really opened up the doors for even our classes that have now gone fully virtual over Zoom. And we will get back to in-person class That's the best. Everybody loves in person.
Yeah.
It's tough being on a Zoom for 8 hours a day for 20 weeks straight. I mean, that's a lot. But it's really opened up the doors to allow for people from across the state, to be able to attend it as well. So now we've got students that doesn't matter if you're in Des Moines or Dubuque or Davenport, or you're here in Cedar Rapids, everybody's on Zoom.
Yeah, you really get to expand your market based on the virtual side of things. I mean, I know we did for Think Great. We were, we did a lot here in Minnesota, but we were also all over the country, but I was flying there. And then all of a sudden with the virtual side, we were going to go remote anyway. So the virtual platforms we were testing them out, but COVID-19 really pushed the throttle forward on everybody going remote. So it's been crazy, but it has opened a lot of new opportunities. So yeah. I'm excited to hear about all the growth that you guys are having. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's awesome. Just even more and more programs, just trying to get them statewide and being able to cut down. I mean, Iowa's not that big, but to go to Western Iowa, it's quite that's a whole day of travel. Yeah. And you can cut all that out, especially if you're just going to have a 1-hour meeting, makes you a lot more efficient. So that's great.
Well, it's interesting. I was doing a lot of in person, and like everybody, when the pandemic broke out, everything was postponed. And so went virtual. And one of the first states I started getting back into for in person was Iowa. So there were segments of Iowa that was more open. And so I was happy to come down there and drive down the 35 and come to Iowa because they just didn't have as tight of restrictions. And what I found is I was doing more blended training. So some of it was in person, but virtual at the same time. And again, that's just a whole different skill set for everybody, where I'm used to walking around a stage and then I've got to operate in this little confined area. So there was a huge learning curve for a lot of people, myself included.
Yeah, and that's true too with just online learning and the different tools. It's not just 100% Zoom. So we had to find other tools that would make it easy for students to be able to interact. And then, of course, once we go back to in-person, having that hybrid model presents a whole bunch of other challenges, where you've got some people in a room together and some people, that are dialing in. And so being able to make sure they're having a similar and good experience is important.
Yeah, the blended ones that I've done, I have to remember that I'm also on camera. So when I start walking all over the stage, I got to come back and peer into the camera from time to time.
Yeah, the camera operators get mad at you when you do a lot of pacing. That's for sure.
Yeah, especially when they have it fixed and they say just stay right there. So we're going into this great new era of business. There's gonna be a lot more options. But it was interesting. You probably don't know the extent that you've empowered me to achieve greatness. And when I first met you, I had just moved out to the Midwest. And so I was pretty new to the Midwest scene, and I was building up clients and contacts out here. And because I was already coming out to Iowa, I was looking for business leaders in the area to meet with. And I looked at your profile on LinkedIn, and obviously you had a ton of tech knowledge and experience. And then at the bottom, there were some things that you were involved in that we had an instant connection, and that would be around the world of cancer.
Yeah.
And I remember sending you a message and just saying that we have some things in common on this, and you connected, and then we grabbed a cup of coffee out there, and I heard about your story and what led you to really help create Beat Cancer today. And, your story and your desire to do something with your experience really inspired me to start my own foundation a few years ago. I had no clue how to do it. And I just kept telling myself and my wife, I said, Aaron figured it out. We can figure it out. And I was just hoping you could share a little bit about your story with us and the background of cancer and what led to you founding and putting together Beat Cancer today.
Yeah, of course. So back in 2007, had a 3.5-year-old, seemingly happy, healthy son named Eli, and just started noticing that he was having some pains and having a hard time walking. And so, just kept taking him to the pediatrician, trying to figure out what was going on. And eventually one morning he just couldn't walk. And I called the pediatrician. I was like, all right, look, this is not just, something small. This seems to be really big. And so I want to bring him in. He's like, absolutely. Met me before they even opened. He brought me in. They did a CT scan there, and he came in, he goes, Aaron, there's there is a tumor that goes down into his pelvis, up into his chest. It's wrapped around his aorta. It's massive, and you got to get to Iowa City today. I said, okay, that's what we'll do. So got in the car, drove to Iowa City. We were there for about 30 days where they just immediately started chemo and confirmed it's cancer called neuroblastoma. And so they kind of laid out the plan. And again, this is back in 2007. And I'm trying to think about the timeline. So, as you do, I guess you Google things and figure out that, neuroblastoma was not a great diagnosis, obviously, but they did have a lot of research being done in New York. So we essentially did a lot of calling of, Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City, talking to the doctors in Iowa, and essentially came down to the decision that we were going to go to New York, at least for his surgery, to do the resection. Yeah. And so we did that, and he had a 14.5-hour surgery. They had shrunk, obviously, the tumor had shrunk with all the chemo, so they felt like they got everything that they could see, but his recovery took a really long time, and so they decided to do more chemo there. And when we got back to Iowa, they said, we wouldn't have done that. We're not sure what you're doing over there in New York, but you really need to make a decision. You either get treatment here or you get treatment in New York. We're not going to do this. They tell us what to do, and we do that here. So we said, okay. So we went to New York, and they were doing antibody treatment there that they had been studying and doing for 15, 20 years, which essentially just gave you something that highlighted the neuroblastoma cells in your body, and then had your own white blood cells attack it. Okay. And after just several rounds of 3F8 antibody treatment, he was clear of neuroblastoma. Wow. And so we stayed on that regimen and just kept going back and forth from, going to school and then taking a week off, going to New York and getting more treatment, coming back. Did that for a couple of years. And then one of his blood work showed an abnormality. And so we went back out there, and it turns out all the chemo and radiation had caused leukemia. And so now basically the only answer for that was a transplant. And so that was January 2012, went through the transplant, and he did not make it through the transplant. So he passed away in 2012, right before he would have turned 8. So that's kind of our personal connection and story with pediatric cancer. But the Beat Cancer start was back in 2009, when several families that had met each other at the University of Iowa, at the hospital there, and had gone through cancer. The University of Iowa has something amazing called Dance Marathon. And so they raise millions of dollars every year to support families, to support and even build part of the hospital, the new hospital. Wow. They support research, they support doctors. It's incredible. And it's a student-run philanthropy. It's amazing. And so, back in 2009, we were just thinking, how can we support these organizations that support us? We've got Children's Cancer Connection here that supports us. Dance Marathon supports us. And as parents, we're really passionate about research because only 4% of the National Cancer Institute's budget actually is directed towards childhood cancer research specifically. Wow. So the research that the Children's Oncology Group out of Pennsylvania was doing was really, really critical. And so as parents, we're like, we want to give back to these organizations. We want to support them. We just had this super simple idea of putting the words "Beat Cancer" on t-shirts and selling them. And we worked, in Iowa, we don't have any professional sports, as you know. So the big rivalry here is the Hawkeyes and the Cyclones. And, and some of us families were Hawkeyes and some of us were Cyclones. And so, we approached those universities and were able to get their logos granted to put on these shirts. So we sold black and gold Beat Cancer shirts, and we sold cardinal and gold Beat Cancer shirts, and they were just wildly popular. So we knew we were onto something. And in 2012, we became an official 501c3. And that's still what we're doing today, is we're doing logo to Beat Cancer shirts and fundraising events.
And how much have you raised so far? Because we were able to go out to, I think we discussed, that was your second event, which was packed. But you guys have done some amazing work. How much have you raised over the years?
Yeah, so since 2009, it's just over $455K. And that's the money that we've given away to all these different organizations. And in a couple of years ago, we started our own scholarship as well. And so we have a pediatric cancer survivor scholarship and a pediatric cancer sibling scholarship. So for kids that either fought and beat cancer, or for siblings of kids who fought cancer, we've got these scholarships for those that want to go on and do some sort of post-secondary education after high school. And we obviously know how hard pediatric cancer hits the family finances. So we wanted to be able to kind of give back to those kids as well, and offer these scholarships. So we've been doing that for a couple of years as well.
So the foundation was started, Eli, correct me if I'm wrong, but he was still alive when the foundation was started.
Yeah, so it was 2009. So he had been in the fight for a couple of years already, and he loved Beat Cancer. It was definitely a family thing. And so I've got tons of pictures of him wearing Beat Cancer shirts. And one of our first events was the big Iowa versus Iowa State football game. We had 150 people, I think, come to that, where, the athletic director at Iowa State hooked us up with free tickets, and we just had a really good time. So I've got so many pictures of him and his buddies, some wearing black and gold, him wearing cardinal and gold, of course, being connected with all that. So it was fun.
Yeah. So when Eli passed, and here you are with a foundation, what kept you going? Because I can't, and I know a lot of our listeners can't imagine losing a child. It's, Gina, as you know, my wife, and you've met her, she's survived 4 cancers. 5 years ago, she suffered cardiac arrest, passed away for 15 minutes, and then came back. But she's here with us. She made it, and we haven't lost any kids. I can't even fathom what you went through. How did you make the decision, or what was your mindset to just keep going with this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've seen obviously lots of families go through this, and every situation is different. Yeah. And I've seen people who dive in and they start foundations afterwards. I've seen families who, or maybe individuals who have said, I can't. I've poured everything, every last drop of me was in this world, and I can't do it anymore. And I totally understand that reaction as well. And I will tell you, I think for the folks that start a foundation, especially when they're starting it in their kid's name, it is one of a parent's greatest fear that their kid will be forgotten. And so for them, starting a foundation, especially in their child's name, is one way that they can try to ensure that no one will forget. And so that's honestly a lot of times when I'm talking to people, especially if they want to say, hey, how do I, my friend just lost their kid, how do I help them, or how do I deal with them? And I say, this may sound counterintuitive, but talk about them. You're not going to remind that parent that their kid died. I promise you. They think about that every day already. But it's going to bring them so much joy knowing that you remember their kid, and that you have stories, and that you're not afraid to talk about them or to have them talk about them. Because sometimes a parent will shut down because they're afraid they're going to make you feel awkward, or that they're going to make you feel bad. Please normalize talking to parents about their kid that passed away. Because again, it's going to relieve one of their greatest fears, that the kid is going to be forgotten. So that's honestly the motivation for why a lot of people start these foundations. And so, for me, obviously Beat Cancer was already a thing. And, I wasn't just doing it just for Eli, right? I wasn't trying to find a cure just for Eli. I met so many kids, especially at the Ronald McDonald House in New York City. 90% of those families, it's the largest one in the world, and 90% of them were neuroblastoma kids. Oh, wow. And so I became so close. It's essentially a big hotel there. You're 12 floors of 80 plus families that are all living together. They're all eating together, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They're all playing together in the fun playroom that they have there. They're socializing every single day. They're swapping stories about, here's what's working with my kid. Here's what I'm going through. And you become so close to all of them. And so for me, it was, this isn't just about finding a cure for Eli. This is a huge problem, and we need to find a cure for all the kids.
There's no doubt. And just to be part of that community at a time when, hope can seem so far off is probably hugely important, just to be around people who are going through something similar. And it's got to give you some hope for the future,
Yeah, for sure. And even for those that, because then when you cross over and now you're one of the, the sad stories, let's say,
Yeah.
and people want to talk to you about, like, well, how do I handle this or how do I handle that? You also have to handle that a little bit differently too,
Yeah.
because you don't want to, well, I don't want to talk to him because his son didn't make it.
Sure.
So being able to offer that hope and that support, no matter what the circumstance, especially no matter what the circumstance they're going through, there's still a lot to be shared and learned there.
And there's still a lot of work to be done in regards to children's cancer. I mean,
Yeah,
I think even on your website, you have it down that 43 kids are diagnosed per day.
Mm-hmm.
That's
it's crazy.
It's a horrific statistic. And I think you put on there that 12% don't make it. So, we're living with something that, this is a topic nobody wants to address, but it's out there. I read something when Gina was going through cancer the first time. One of the doctors told me that 1 out of 3 people will get cancer in their lifetime, some form of it.
Right.
But that 1 out of 1 people out there are impacted by cancer.
That's exactly right.
So that was a stat that always stuck with me. And, even on your website, you have down that cancer, children's cancer is 4 times or more than the next 4 children's diseases combined, at least the amount of it, right? So there's childhood cancer, and that number of children diagnosed is 4 times more than any other, or more than the 4 next diseases. Yeah. It's crazy to think about that.
Yeah, and it's on this side of it, looking back, it's crazy too how little I knew about it before.
Yeah.
Eli was diagnosed with cancer. The fact that, oh yeah, kids get cancer too. And I think we've probably all seen the St. Jude's commercials, and you've seen the bald kids on TV.
Yep.
And you've been asked if you want to round up your change to give to St. Jude and all that. But for whatever reason, it just doesn't really strike you until you know someone, or you've been impacted by someone, and then that turns you into a firebrand almost overnight. You learn all the statistics, you learn all about how much funding is needed. And one of the organizations that came up in New York came about because they said, well, what would it take for us to get a new version of this 3F8 antibody treatment? And the doctor said it would probably be about $2 million. And the parent said, that's it? Just $2 million? Like, we can do that. And they literally did selling cookies and fundraisers, and they called themselves the Band of Parents. And within a very short amount of time, they raised enough money to get the trials, to get it FDA approved, and to get that new medicine into kids within a couple of years. So never discount motivated parents. That's for sure.
No doubt about it. And that's still crazy to only $2 million. Why didn't they put that on the news? I mean, like, tell somebody sooner.
Yeah, right. For sure.
Well, it's interesting because when Gina had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, she was at the City of Hope in Duarte, California, and she was at the end of her treatments. The chemo didn't work, the radiation didn't work, so they put her in a sterile room where she would undergo a stem cell transplant. And at that point, my sons, I would take them in to see her, and they were probably at that point, 11 years old. And when you walk into the bone marrow transplant ward, if you're in that ward, there's really not too many older adults in there. They don't really survive that. So it's a lot of younger people. And I remember walking my boys in to go see Gina, and they walked past a room that had a crib in it. And they were just shaking their heads like, wait a minute, wait. And then there was a little boy that came out in his gown and attached to his IV with a squirt gun, and he was shooting the nurses. And yeah, he was having a good time. I'm not sure about the nurses, but he was. But I remember my oldest son, Brandon, looked at me and he says, hey, Daddy, kids can get cancer? And so it was an interesting question. They just didn't realize that they could get it too. And there was a very real moment right there. I said, yeah, you can get it at any age, but it's really hard for us to accept that kids get it, and I just can't imagine, what you went through at that time. And then especially the turn that it took, but you must be impacting so many people right now. I mean, you have to be getting stories after all these years of doing this that thank you for what you've done. and helping people to navigate through this, let them know they're not alone.
Yeah, to me, honestly, one of the prayers that I had throughout Eli's journey was, God, just show me why. Like, I want Eli to be healed, but ultimately, just I really want you to show me why Eli's going through this.
Yeah.
And to your point, even to this day, I will get random Facebook messages from someone who'll say, I just want you to know that for years I followed along on Eli's journey, and this is how it impacted my relationship with my son, my thoughts on this, my relationship with God. And to me, that is God answering that prayer very specifically, saying, these are the folks that were reached because of Eli's witness. I mean, he impacted more people in his 7 almost 8 years of life than I probably ever will my entire life. And so those to me are really answers to prayer, when people reach out and say, I followed along on your blog for years, I never said anything, but I just want you to know. And so that to me, that's huge.
It is. And I would think that many people have to rely on faith during this time period. Many people may question their faith during this time period. You can see that would happen. How important has faith been for you during that time period, and even now moving forward? You rely on your faith a lot, but how have you had to rely on that? There had to be some dark times for you where you don't have the answers, right? God's got his plan and you're trying to figure it out, but it doesn't make sense all the time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was pivotal then, and it's pivotal now. For me, it was very much a hopeless feeling. As a dad, you want to fix everything, and you don't want to see your family hurting. And so when you're that hopeless, as far as like, I can't physically change this, I can't fix it. It really puts you in a position where you're like, okay, God, this is all you. This is going to work out, according to how you want it to. But let me tell you how I think it should be. So I've met so many people that were on every part of that spectrum that you can imagine. People that it really drove them deeper into their faith. People who had no maybe sense of faith before, but it really drove them to their knees, and they became really dependent on prayer. And folks that never believed in God, and this actually, emphasized to them that there truly is no God. It really drove them even further. And my approach to all of that has always, honestly, just been the same. Be transparent, like show how you feel and share your faith, but also just be really kind and understanding of folks that are going through everything that they're going through, and just be with them where they are, and, I became very in tune with how difficult it is when someone just says thoughts and prayers, and just how personally someone can take that when they realize it's not genuine, and it's not, it's just something that you're just saying because you got to say something.
Yeah.
And so I just think I learned a lot about how to talk with folks and how to interact with folks, no matter where they are on their faith journey.
I think that's one of the things we learned too is, once Gina was diagnosed, and she got diagnosed in 99, there weren't as many resources back then as there are today. And I feel like people kind of many people just let us go through the journey because they didn't know what to say. They didn't know how to help out. And yet, outwardly you put on the appearance that everything's fine, or you try to, but inside it's so much turmoil, and it's hard to express that. I know for us, after she went into remission, we were invited back to the City of Hope. They would send these postcards out and say, come back for a reunion. And we're like, no, thanks. We just stayed away from it for a long time, because when I would go to see her, I would step onto that campus and I could feel the energy come out of my body. I was physically exhausted by the time I parked until I walked to her room in the bone marrow transplant ward. I felt a physical transformation. And so when they said she's in remission, you can take her home now, we never went back. And then we eventually started to work with organizations like American Cancer Society, and we did some work with the Relay for Life because you just want to give back. And then when we learned about Beat Cancer Today, we wanted to come to your event. And but it's a journey. It's nothing like they show in the movies when somebody has cancer. You know,
there's for sure.
No matter what Hallmark movie or Lifetime story you're watching, it can't capture the real effect. I know for you, kindness is a huge trait. And I think we live in a world that probably that trait couldn't be used more now than ever. We live in a very judgmental, angry, frustrated world. How important is it for you to just embrace that word kindness right now?
Yeah, I think it's big, and it's something that I have to even remind myself of quite a bit, because especially in the world of social media and everybody posting all their feelings about everything on Facebook and Twitter, and it's so easy to get sucked into a vortex of negativity, you know, and especially when you've got friends that are very extreme on both sides, you know, and so I shouldn't even say both sides. There's so many sides, and there's, you know, just everybody sounding off. I just have to remind myself, okay, pick kindness. If I got to respond to something, which I almost never do, but you know, if someone asks me something, I just got to remind myself responding kindness, because it goes a really long way, you know, and just people are so passionate about things, and I get it, but we got to think first that that's a human being, and you know, to show love and kindness to folks.
I think it's interesting. Well, it's interesting because when you've been through traumatic incidents like cancer or, you know, other things of that level, you just look at the world differently. It takes a lot to get me riled up, and typically somebody's post isn't going to do it. You know what I mean? But it is amazing to see the world we live in when people just fly off the handle at negativity. And I mean, they're all in. And sometimes it makes me think maybe they haven't had that incident in their life where it's caused their perceptions to refocus. You know, I appreciate every day. And, you know, while Gina's the one that's had the cancers and had the health issues, you know, like you as a caregiver, you're there to experience it. And it forges who you are. And you never look at things the same anymore. You don't come out of being a caregiver the same. You know what I mean? And
I usually tell people the biggest lesson learned out of almost all of that. I think one of my biggest lessons learned is just don't sweat the small stuff. You know, like there's just so much, even to the point of like I can get road rage just like anybody, but you know, but I just, now I think about even something like that differently. Like, man, maybe that guy or that gal is having the worst day of their life. Maybe they're rushing to a hospital. Maybe they're, you know, I don't know what they're going through. So, you know, I just don't sweat the small stuff as much as I used to, because I know how much worse it could be. And so it's really changed kind of my outlook.
You know, people will often say to me, you know, why is it that you don't get riled up? And I said, well, I kind of save it for the big stuff. You know what I mean? Like I've been in emergency rooms, ICUs, just too much, like you, and I'll save the stress and I'll save the frustrations for that. But you're right. When somebody cuts you off on the road, I think that's good advice. Two pieces of good advice. Don't sweat the small stuff, and exhibit kindness, because I've thought about that exact same thing. I'll see somebody whizzing down the road and I think, all right, well, why you shouldn't be speeding? Maybe they're rushing to the hospital. I've done that before. And you just want somebody to extend some grace to you, you know? So you guys have done amazing things with Beat Cancer Today, but you've also gone through the pandemic. What is the pandemic, or the impact of the pandemic, been for your foundation?
And not only a pandemic. So as you may know, Iowa was hit with a derecho last August, which, if you don't know what that word means, it's basically like an inline hurricane. So we had a hurricane with no bodies of water nearby. But essentially it was, you know, a sustained wind across our state for about 45 minutes, and it took out crops, and specifically here in Cedar Rapids, it took out over half of our tree canopy. So
Wow.
just, all these trees just everywhere. And of course, houses destroyed and all that. And so, this poor town can't seem to catch a break. It's floods or it's derechos or whatever. And so for us here in Cedar Rapids specifically, we had to cancel our first big, not our first big, but our annual fundraiser, the gala,
Yeah.
like you attended, because of the pandemic. So canceled that. And essentially we decided we're gonna pivot to an outdoor thing, where everybody can be socially distanced, wear masks. We're gonna do this poker run where you're gonna go stop to stop and at your own pace, and we're gonna do this cool fundraiser. That was scheduled for 2 weeks after the derecho. So derecho hits, the whole town's out of power forever, and so we're like, all right, that's canceled. So we essentially had no fundraisers last year, and we still had some shirt sales and things like that. And I guess one of the silver lining, I suppose, is that we're 100% volunteer based, so we don't have staff, we don't have any expenses other than our website, I guess. We really don't have any costs that we have to cover besides insurance and website. So, we essentially just had to give a lot less money to those organizations that we support, which is a huge bummer, but we were still able to give something. And of course, all of these other organizations were also very much hit. So anything we could give them, they were absolutely appreciative of. But we went from, year after year of giving $75,000 to these organizations to I think we were at 25K last year. Wow. So we are excited for this year to be able to get back to being able to do events and do fundraising events. We also had a really big partnership with another nonprofit here called Gems of Hope, where we did Beat Cancer shirts for all the school districts in the Cedar Rapids area. Wow. That said Beat Cancer, and they had Gems of Hope on the back too. And we just split the proceeds with Gems of Hope, and that was a really cool fundraiser across all these different schools. We sold over 500 t-shirts, so that was really cool. Things like that keep us going too.
Well, I know collaboration is important to you in the workplace, but I'm sure it's huge in the foundation side of things too. You got to collaborate through all this nonsense, right? You never know what's coming, whether it's a pandemic or a derecho. Who would have thought?
Yeah, exactly.
So when is the next live event? What are you guys thinking about now? Will it be in 2021 or?
Yeah, so we might still do the poker run later, maybe later in the fall. And we're actually going to do a very limited in-person comedy show on June 4th. So we're going to have a comedian come in. It's going to be limited to just 120 people, so we can still spread out. I don't know about where you're at here. So many folks have gotten their second vaccine already, and so they're feeling a lot more comfortable. We're still going to have masks required at the event and all that, and again limiting it to about a third of its capacity at the venue, but at least we're going to be able to get together, have a fun night. It's not going to be a bunch of silent auction items and that whole kind of thing that we used to do, but it's going to be an opportunity for us to at least keep telling our story to the community of what we're doing, and point out that kids in Iowa are still getting cancer, and we still got to support these families. And so just trying to get that word out. And then again, like I said, maybe do another fundraiser later this fall too.
Well, I know you've got Gina and I supporting you from the Minnesota area. Do you ever have people outside of Iowa supporting the foundation?
Yeah, sure. Obviously our focus is on Iowa families. Yes. However, we kind of have this model where, we can go outside of Iowa and support other local organizations. So one example of that was a couple years ago, we partnered with Pascal's Pals in Columbia, Missouri, and Pascal's Pals supports the Women and Children's Hospital there. So it's not 100% focused on or dedicated to childhood cancer specifically, but that's a really big piece of that hospital. And so we actually got licensing rights from Mizzou, and so we did some Beat Cancer shirts with the Mizzou logo on it. And for any shirt that has a Mizzou logo on it, we split the proceeds with Pascal's Pals down there. So we still give money to COG, and we still give money to some of the support organizations here, but we definitely give proceeds to Pascal's Pals down there, so it can be local support.
Oh, that is awesome. You are inspiring so many people, not just in Iowa, but outside of Iowa. I know every year I'm seeing pictures of Eli on Facebook around his birthday. And so, I think simple things like that not only keep his memory alive, but maybe you're also inspiring parents to do something similar, because that is probably, as they say, for parents, that's the most traumatic thing we could go through. And here you are, you have a foundation, you're inspiring people, and yet you've done it through what could be considered one of the worst circumstances ever. I mean, I believe you've inspired more people than you'll ever know. And, for me, when I decided to launch the Think Great experience, I said, I got to have Aaron on the show. I have to, because I have a lot of people that have inspired people around the world and in their communities, but you've actually inspired me in so many ways. That connection we have through cancer, but also the fact that you did something about it through a tough time told me I have to do something. And, our foundation awards scholarships to military spouses. So even though the military spouse community has a tough life and challenges that they face, and I'm sure some of them have experienced childhood cancer, maybe there's a way we could team up in some capacity. We'll have to talk about that offline. But, I knew we had a tough run at it with cancer, but different than you did. And so you actually inspired me to put a dream together, because I meet a lot of people say, I've always wanted to do a foundation. Oh, you just got to do one, because I didn't have any background in it when I started it. I don't know how much background how in depth you knew about foundations, but you took something that impacted you and you did something with it. And that's inspiring to me. And I know it's inspiring to everybody listening right now. So I just want to let you know how much people appreciate you and what you've done, and your whole team, because you've surrounded yourself by amazing people at Beat Cancer today.
Yeah,
you
for
can't
sure.
do it alone.
Yep, absolutely. It's all volunteers. And so, yeah, thank you for your kind words. I appreciate that. I've certainly been inspired by others too, and absolutely inspired by the kids. So, when you see what they go through, and again, everybody's situation is different. And so just having an understanding and respect for that I'm not trying to compare, my pain to your pain, or anything like that. But if there's things that we can do together, if there's anything that I've learned in setting up, we ran for like 3 years without even being a 501c3. We're like, we don't know what we're doing. We're just trying to get a bunch of money. And I was using my personal PayPal account to take orders and writing checks and sending it off. I'm like, man, there's got to be a better way. And, just finding folks that are willing to help, and, that are willing to contribute, and surround yourself with people who know stuff. Right. So if there's a piece of it that I can be the person who knows stuff for you and can at least point you in the right direction, I am absolutely happy to do that and honored to do that.
I think what you're doing is amazing. Let me ask you this, for yourself or for the foundation, are there any upcoming goals that you have? Maybe just getting through this year or even beyond that, anything that you are working on?
I think overall just growth, just trying to, like I said, even it tends to be easy to do things in your area, right? So we were always doing stuff in central Iowa because that's where most of us were. I move out here to eastern Iowa. Now all of a sudden our events are in eastern Iowa. It would be so great to be able to grow and be able to still do events in central Iowa as well as eastern Iowa. But obviously, this isn't my full-time gig either. So I've got a lot of stuff going on with NewBoCo. And so just finding that time and being able to find, folks that are willing to step up and say, hey, I will lead, an event here in a different part of the state. That's exactly the kind of stuff that I'd like to see more and more of if we can get there.
That is awesome. I know you're impacting people on a huge level. And let me ask you this, if there's somebody listening right now that maybe they've encountered some challenges like you faced or other challenges in related to the health scares that are out there, or even just the pandemic in general. Do you have any tips for people that are looking to take their life right now and put it in a new direction? What would you recommend to them?
Well, first, I would say make sure you're in a good spot to be able to do that. So if you're in the middle of the fights, focus on yourself and your family and getting through all of that. Make sure you're not taking on too much. But that's not to say you can't start something in the middle of it. So I'd be a hypocrite to say not to. We did that with Beat Cancer, right? Eli was in the fight. And so just be cognizant of what you can take on, and then reach out. Again, you might be surprised at the person sitting next to you might have some knowledge in a very particular thing you're trying to solve when you're looking at starting a foundation or something, if that's what you're doing. Ask for help. Don't be too shy to ask for help. There's resources out there that can help you find volunteers. And so like there's not paid to say this, but like volunteerlocal.com is something that we've used quite a bit to just say, hey, I'm looking for someone to do XYZ, and it could be done remotely, or I've even said, I'm looking for a treasurer. I'm looking for someone to fill this role in our organization. And of course, that's a big role. So you got to.
I have a foundation and I've never heard of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, reach out, obviously, to your Facebook friends and connections, probably first and foremost, because the people that are closest to you might be the ones that really want to help and are passionate about helping you. Find people that are like-minded and are passionate about the same things. And again, just don't be afraid to ask questions and, connect to resources, try and figure out what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And everybody's got kind of a different goal. Figure out what's your motivation? Why are you passionate about it? And if that passion is there, then certainly all these things will fall into place and you'll make a difference.
I think that word passion is incredibly important. I think that when people like you start a foundation based on this topic, passion has to be that driving force.
Yeah.
And never lose sight of it.
It's really cool that, some of obviously our board is still, parents that had kids fighting cancer, but not everybody. And so it's really, really cool to see when people who were not personally impacted by childhood cancer necessarily still want to become involved, and they want to help, and, they become passionate about it just because they've met you or they know you, or, in my case, maybe they met or knew Eli. And so they're passionate about it as well, even though it didn't impact them directly. And I have a lot of respect for someone who is willing to step into this world when they didn't necessarily have to, because they knew someone directly. So, one of the other organizations, I'm the chairman of the board for Candlelighters NYC in New York, and it is also just volunteers that want to help families that are coming to New York for cancer treatment. And it's, all these volunteers who willingly will meet with these families and these kids that are going through something absolutely terrible. And honestly, a lot of these kids, though, they pass away, and it deeply impacts these volunteers who willingly walked into that world and into that situation to just give of themselves. And so to me, that's just insanely inspiring, and I respect that a lot.
I think what you're doing is awesome. I think you brought an awareness to a topic that's hard for us to talk about, but you've done it with grace, you've done it with kindness, and you're inspiring just so many people. And I just want to say thanks for being on the show today. I mean, thanks for sharing your story. Thanks for sharing the direction that you're going with the foundation. If somebody wants to connect with you, or, volunteer or be a part of what you're doing, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Sure. Just go to beatcancertoday.org. There's a contact form on there. It goes right to me, so I'll get it. But beatcancertoday.org.
That is so awesome. Aaron, I just wanted to say thanks again for all that you do. You've been an inspiration to me, among many other people, and I really appreciate you. I value everything you're doing, and thank you so much for being on today.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate you too. Everything that you're doing. It's so good to see you, even though we're not in person, just to see your face again. And thank you for the opportunity and for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have to regroup again so we can hear about all the success once you go live again in person.
Great. You bet.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, Eric.